Hello and welcome to the second video of 8.5. What is we're talking more about complex numbers here. We're going to start working with these bad boys. Remember, there's only one imaginary number, right? It's I. But we can adapt this to help us solve some of the things that we couldn't solve before, or simplify some of the things we couldn't simplify before. All right, here, we already did this one in the last video, but let's go ahead and do it again. The square root of negative 100 still does not exist. There is still no real number that when multiplied by itself is going to be negative 100. But if I split this up and take out that negative 1 part, I can get I, and I can get a 10, and thus the result is 10I as my answer. Still doesn't exist. Still not a real number. Still can't put that on the graph anywhere. But at least I can write it now. Let's try it again. Negative square root of negative 36. Let's deal with this part first because all this is on the outside is just a negative 1. Not super exciting. So let's go ahead and deal with this inside part first. We'll just copy paste that. I'm going to rewrite this as negative 1 and 36 instead of negative 36. This part is now my I. A lot of teachers say, just take out the I, just take out the I, take out the I. As long as you remember what that means, go for it. You can do that. Honestly, every time somebody said that to me, I was like, please don't take my I, right? Like my eyeball out of my head. So in other words, I like to split out the negative is what I like to say. I like to say take out the negative of the fraction, of the radical, pardon me. This 36, we know classic square root there, 6, and I've got that negative 1. And so I've got a total. We wouldn't normally write this as negative I6 because we're kind of still thinking this is a letter. We like letters to be at the back, and so we'd probably say negative 6I. Mostly, we are also combining the two real parts and leaving the imaginary part alone, much like we combine the two number parts and leave the variable alone. So very similar coordination here between variables and not real numbers, or variables and numbers, as we see here with the imaginary numbers and the real numbers, okay? So we don't really want to write it that way. Negative square root of 2. Unfortunately, square root of 2 is not a whole number. Same thing still applies here. We don't want to take stuff to decimals because decimals and I, yes, they play decently well together, but not very pretty. The square root of 2 isn't even a terminating decimal. It's a non-ending decimal. It's a non-terminating decimal. And so we'd be writing for a very long time, dot, 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 then I? Like, that's a little confusing, right? So why don't instead we just take out the negative? This becomes I, that becomes root 2. Now, if we look at this one, we tend to put radicals in the back. Whole numbers we put in the front, then variables, then radicals. If we were to write this backwards, it's still legitimate. It still means the same thing, but it's hard to tell whether you have root 2I or root 2I. Do you see that? That's a little difficult to tell which one it is. And so we don't like to write it that way. We tend to put the I in front of the radical, but behind a whole number. All right, let's do this one more time. Here, 54, also not a perfect square, but this is one of those ones from past problems that we know simplifies out. And so what we're going to do here is start by getting rid of the I part. And then we're going to simplify as we know. I'm going to go with 6 and 9. That's up to you. You can also go with, let's see, that's 3, 3. You could also go with 27 and 2 and keep going. No matter what you do, you're going to get down to three threes and a 2, in which case I can take out a 3. This has become an I. So I've got I times 3 root 2. I'm sorry, 3 root 2 times 3. Which would be I times 3 times root 6. But again, we don't like to put the I in front of a real one, so we'd have 3I root 6. Now you'll notice I'm using this little curvy I. That is not a requirement, but it's actually easier to tell what you mean. If you have a bunch of these I's, the dot on top tends to get dropped off and people accidentally believe they're ones, okay? So if you want, you can adapt so that if you know your handwriting's a little not perfect, not pristine as mine, like mine, then you may want to use a curvy I to indicate yourself you're not talking about a 1, especially when there are 1s in the definition. All right, so notice this new I is just a new layer to what we've been doing. It's a new level. We're not changing anything below. We're still simplifying the same way. We're still taking square roots the same way. And that's going to kind of be the theme throughout the rest of this section, is that everything with I works the same way as it has in all the other sections. So we're not going to go into as much detail as we do the first time because it's the same. We're just going to tack on this new level of I. All right. Let's go ahead. In the next video, we'll talk about multiplication, and I'll see you there.